All right, here we are. Let's do it. A first time watching reaction, Contact from 1997. That's right. The first time the old Gourd King has seen this one. I did the Arrival last week, and he was the uh, multiple viewer, if you will, for that film. We came with some interesting takes. It was interesting comparing and contrasting my first take versus his season take, and we will do the same now with Contact, my friend. Brother, thank you for doing this again, man. It's fun.
Oh, I appreciate the invite, and it's funny because this is uh, kind of feels like the cousin to Arrival. There's a
Mhm.
lot of similarities between those two movies.
I really couldn't agree more. I think if you had asked me cold, definitely before I'd watched Arrival, I would have had probably a very different take on this movie or sort of an advice or reaction. And now watching it, especially on the heels of Arrival, it's like, wow, this is interesting, Phil. So, but Christian is here, man. He has been one of my biggest supporters and stuff from the get go. And dude, I wish you'd email me or something. I don't think you're on Twitter. I don't know how to communicate with you regularly, man. I'd love to be able to connect and do some stuff together or something, man. But thanks for everything. Thanks for being here and hanging out with us.
Bonjour.
But yeah, Contact, saw it in the theater. This is sort of in that heyday of Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, sort of the Carl Sagan, all science. I don't know. It's weird how I don't know the story. I didn't do any major trivia deep dive or anything like that, but I know a little bit of the background. This was conceived back in I think the 70s with Carl Sagan and I believe Francis Ford Coppola, who I think sued him at one point about it. And it evolved into much more about her than I felt like the science epic that they may have been going for. And it feels like it's supposed to be more of an alien film, but there's just no alien. Like it's so odd in hindsight. I don't remember how it was billed, man. Gore, I really can't tell you. Like I don't remember how anyone felt going into it. But I know we all came away like a pretty pleasant experience, if nothing else. So
I remember a fairly heavy amount of marketing. I mean, not like the kind of stuff we see today, but I do remember this movie not necessarily getting hype. It's hard to judge that in the age where the internet wasn't like full of like social media sites, but I do remember like this seeing previews of this, and it had Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, and so it had some star power behind it. I actually for a long time didn't know Robert Zemeckis directed this, but I don't know, other than maybe like Steven Spielberg, directors didn't seem to get a ton of hype back then the way they do now. Uh, but the reception for this, I kind of feel like when the movie came out, I stopped hearing about it, and I really didn't know anybody who watched it for a while. But over the years, I heard a ton of people say that they really love this movie. So uh, I started to, I guess, because I always was just fairly indifferent towards watching
mm,
it. I was like, yeah, if I see it, I see it. If I don't really care. But over time, I had heard, a lot of people said, "Oh no, this is actually really, really great. You got to check it out." And I was like, "Okay, maybe I will at some point." And then, I got this invite and decided to do so. And I'll say this: I am definitely glad I have watched it now. I do think it was, at the very least, an enjoyable movie to watch.
it is definitely a fun film as sort of like I think you said cousin or not, but it's definitely a nice fellowship film to go with Arrival, which we watched and
Hmm.
we did last time. So I feel like it fits that same film. Like it's a good. It's like you feel like you could get like the double set. You know what I mean? It could be like a double DVD or something. Like you feel like it could be that kind of thing from that same vein.
Hmm.
Zemeckis, I think, was really the perfect choice, and maybe this is what got it made so fast. And I didn't do a dive deep again in its development, but because of the success he had with the way they handled archive footage and stuff in Forrest Gump, I feel like was the way to kind of fill in some gaps and piece some stuff together for this using Clinton footage, obviously the archival footage out in space, some different elements of technology. And again, that archival stuff with like what they did with Clinton, they didn't do any major face type, person type inserts on the scale of Forrest Gump, but it was so well done in Forrest Gump that it
Yeah.
definitely fills in the gaps to make this feel like it's actually happening in the real time in the theater. Like when you see this in '97, you feel like this is actually could be happening right now, kind of thing. So that was probably I think well achieved for sure.
Yeah, I think in that, like, it's funny because for me, in that sense, I would totally agree that Zemeckis was the right choice. There's another sense in which I think he was a bad choice. Uh, but we'll get to more what I mean as we go over the movie, because like I do have a good number of issues with this one. Like
Mhm.
I feel like I mean I don't know a ton about Carl Sagan. I know a little bit. I know he was a scientist. I know he did like the Cosmos series and all that stuff. And that's how a lot of people know him. I kind of feel like I could take a guess where his influence is in this. And that stuff, if I'm right, is really interesting in this movie. Like a lot of the technical stuff, I found myself very fascinated by. It's almost everything else that I really have problems with.
Mm. Okay.
Like to me, the interesting thing between this movie and Arrival is I feel like, as much as many problems as I have with Arrival, I feel like the tone in Arrival would suit this movie better. Uh,
Yeah,
because,
we're definitely going to get to some of that. Let's just start with
yeah,
just the beginning setup. I'm just using some IMDb photos, folks. Sharing lately has just been a hassle between my buffering issues here locally, because everybody knows I live very remotely, but also just the idea of copyright issues and stuff like that, which have been pretty easy to work around. But I did want to deal with more of them. Let me get to, yeah, like the dad. So the biggest thing for me is there's a massive setup
mhm,
and a lot of focus early in the film, this first intro, and what kind of event happens when we fast forward to the Jodie Foster adult phase is I feel like the film, I don't want to say, I don't know what it was originally conceived as, but this film is a lot more of sort of a love letter to SETI scientists and people who believe in aliens and who love science to be the answer and cure all for everything. That love letter is set up very nicely with the cutesy dootsy little girl, and she's a science little genius, and dad's going to help and support her. And so that's like the initial little setup to everything.
mhm.
Gord, any real takeaways from that for you as far as, how you were feeling during that sort of initial phase of things?
I mean, as far as the setup is concerned, I think it's actually pretty strong. As far as the more, uh, I guess, the human element moments of the movie or scenes in the movie, this is probably, I think, the best of those. It establishes the closeness she had with her father, her interest in uh, this type of thing. There is sort of later on, I think, a bit of a redundancy with because there's you find out at the beginning that the mother's passed away, and granted, it's utilized well because she you get a sense of her journey of why she lacks faith and stuff. Like you find out her mother passed away, and she asked her question. She's asking her dad, could we contact this planet? Could we contact this planet? And then she asks, could we contact mom? And so that it's like, oh, okay, so uh, that plays a little bit into why she has doubts regarding, like the existence of God and stuff. I do think later on there's a bit of a redundancy as far as that element to her character when it comes to her father. And,
Mhm.
and yet it's like, I kind of get why they, I mean, not kind of, I totally get why they did it because of the relationship with the father is kind of more instrumental. So, because
Mhm.
I guess sort of semi spoiler for later in the movie, you find out he passed away, which you
Mhm.
find that out fairly early. Uh, and he died. I guess he died pretty tragically, and died when she was very, very young. Uh, and their closeness does play into the movie later on. I'm just like, I think both things are well utilized. It's just I am curious. Maybe if I rewatch this, if I would think of a way to where you could do that just kind of once and get your point across. But
I feel
as
like
far as
they
I can tell now,
almost,
it's fine.
yeah, because they're going to have this sort of, I don't want to say speech, if you will, from the big financial investor later in the movie that kind of rehashes her entire life, like he knows everything about her, and it kind of duplicates a lot of what the audience has seen. Like you said, I think that maybe they shouldn't have revealed exactly what happened to the dad. Just cut that piece out,
Hmm.
right? Because he's going to rehash it and fill in the gaps for you. Oh, this happened when she was age 9, and then she goes on. Here's what happened from there to when we physically see her in the audience. So you're
Yeah.
right. I don't know why we had to have both, and I think the latter would have been good enough, and it would have actually made us, I don't want to say, have an emotional reaction to the plight of the character, going, "Oh man, he died. Like that's what happened. Like, oh man." So
Mhm.
yeah. Anyway, then we see her sort of just struggling to keep financing. She's first working in like, I guess is it like a third world like South America or something, and then they're going to shut down funding, and then she's going to end up taking a role over in New Mexico. 4 years later, they fast forward, and we find her there working with the satellites in a hodgepodge team that reminds me more of Twister wannabe than any character. I mean, there's only William Fichtner's character is the only one that's really worth
Yeah.
noting.
Probably should note one thing about the 4 years prior is that's where she meets Matthew
Yeah,
McConaughey's character.
yeah.
Now, I'll be perfectly honest. Like, okay, so their relationship, I don't really have much of an issue with. It's the fact that they just kind of meet, and then, oh, by the way, it turns out he becomes this very, like, I mean, this must be emphasized, like the most influential spiritual advisor basically on the planet, and that kind of becomes a major plot convenience. And
Hmm.
for such a meeting to have occurred that so directly affects her, I'm like, wow, that is a huge plot convenience that you're relying on there. And that's just one of several, unfortunately, that I think does kind of weigh this movie down. I mean, their scenes together are fine. I don't mind the idea of a romance playing into this, but when you meet him, he's a unknown basically. Like when she meets him, it's like the only connection he has to anyone in her life is he's attempted to interview her boss before. But then the fact
Right.
that he becomes like this very powerful figure who has a major say in some of the events later on, it's like, wow. Oh, well, good thing she met him, I guess.
Well, yeah, because I think there's other, yeah, yeah. So let's dig in a little deeper. I will say on the rewatch, um, she jumps in the sack with him pretty quick without really setting up
Mhm,
how cute he is. I mean, it's okay that he's handsome and whatever. Again, you're right. Like, why is he there? What is he doing? Quote, interviewing the boss. He's obviously writing something. There is some spiritual back and forth. They scratch a little bit once they're in bed. They'll drop some exposition, and then she just does the whole freak out, run away thing,
mhm,
which creates the setup later when they see each other again. But what also is happening that Gord you're talking about is that over the course of that 4 years, he wrote this book, and it's put him like in the national spotlight. So I really could I almost felt like this is I couldn't think of anybody other than Carl Sagan that really kind of was like someone who wrote some sort of like scientific version of like a super spiritual book. I don't know on the theology side. It's definitely a
mhm.
lot of spiritual mumbo jumbo type stuff that's dropped
I mean,
throughout the movie from this.
you could maybe argue to a certain extent like a Joel Osteen, but he was kind of popular before the
Yeah, he
whole
was an
this like,
actual preacher. Yeah,
maybe Rick Warren with Purpose Driven Life or something like that. That was a really
maybe.
popular one. But he already the both of them already pastored huge churches before even then, so it's kind of
Right.
hard to find. It's not really an equivalent, but
It
and
was
again,
hard
I
to.
don't necessarily even have a problem with that idea of his character. It's just the fact that these two meet before then, like because he writes his book within that 4 year period in that gap,
Mhm.
and the fact that they've already met and that he's very instrumental to a lot of the events, I'm like, whew, that's a huge plot convenience there, which those irk me, and there's a few of those. There's quite a few of those in this movie, which
Yeah,
I do think bogs the film down because
yeah,
there's a lot of great ideas in this as far as the film story is concerned.
yeah, and they just do, I think, a pretty good job of. She just happens to be the person that is listening. She's the one that hears the signal, and they can translate the signal. And I actually kind of felt like this connected also to Independence Day a little bit. Like this feels like a less sci-fi alien invasion, alien exterminate the Earth. Oh, what if they're just benevolent and they just want to talk to us and stuff? Version of that sort of like SETI, hearing the voice, and then the big government, which is again contrivances, also happens to have this point person, this other scientist that basically is the one who cut her funding in the
Mhm.
opening sequence. Um,
And she
was
just so happens to hear that signal, like literally, like just like I want to say within weeks before her project's going to be completely
Yeah,
cut off. And this Now, like that kind of thing, I'm like, okay, that probably would have gone down with no issue. The only problem I had with it is I kind of do wish that her discovering the signal had something actually to do with her particular skills. Um, because really all you know about her is just her interest in the field and how
Hmm.
driven she is, and that's all fine and good. I kind of wish that they would have focused a little bit on what makes her so good at it and then implemented that into how she is the one who happens to find it and happens to find it right before she's going to get shut down. And because I think that would have enhanced things a lot because
Oh, I
she
couldn't.
basically just is just kind of out there and then the signal comes. Really has nothing to do with her skill. It just happens to come at that time.
Yeah, and they really easily could have set that up better with the dad, like thinking outside the
Hmm.
box. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like this element of, she's this whiz kid that doesn't follow the same sort of patterns with the satellites. And maybe that's why they're running out of funding. It's like maybe if you weren't wasting time chasing, these random, I don't know, the science gobbledygook they'd want to throw at a movie like this to make it seem like that's why Tom Skerritt's character is trying to shut them down to begin with and cut the funding, and then why she, like you said, she picked up on something no one else had picked up on. It wasn't just blind luck in a lot of ways. But
Yeah.
um and that's kind of how it starts to kind of unpack a little bit. And obviously there's no funding, so she's going to be going through the process of there's this thing out here and we need to figure it out and what we're going to do. And yeah, it's all right. I didn't really dislike anything at this point. I thought all this was fine. I felt like the technology and sort of like some of the reaction stuff I think was actually pretty good as well. One thing I really liked was the way they would incorporate
Oh
different
yeah,
perspectives in the news, very
this is
similar to
part
what we
of
see a little bit in Arrival, but
this.
still
Yeah,
I
this
thought
is,
pretty
and
good.
I would say the way this movie handled that and the way politicians got involved, I think this movie did that aspect significantly better than Arrival did. I mean, there's a little bit of clunkiness with some, like, it's funny because he's on screen right now. I think Rob Lowe is probably the worst casting in this movie and
Oh, it
probably
was
the character.
awful.
I
Yeah.
don't think he's good at all in this. I think his character is kind of a shot across the bow at conservatives. It's very, very hammy. Because most of the political scenes I actually kind of dig, and I think for the most part, like I think Angela Bassett's very well cast. I think she's great. Um, I think most of the other political figures are really good. I think kind of showing how politics could affect something like this and maybe sort of keep her out of the loop is really well implemented. I think the way they show how the public reacts, how the media reacts, I think all of that is actually really well implemented. It's like all that stuff I was really digging, all the technical stuff I was really, really into. Like to me, that's the strength of the film. It's I kind of wish there was more of that personally because a lot of the other stuff I feel like bogs the movie down because there's a lot of convenience and it can be very saccharine at times, oddly enough. For with Carl Sagan and being involved, I was, knowing he was like a scientist, I thought, I thought this was going to be a little less that, but I'm guessing he had more of a hand in the technical side of it.
Right. Right. Tomby's here. Great to see you.
What's
Thanks
up,
for
Toby?
watching. Love contact, and says hail to all. Well, hail to you. I know they also did reach out to like normal everyday people for
Mhm.
this element of, a lot of these folks are real alien nuts and brought their own props and own, I mean, it was crazy costume, all that stuff. So that stuff feels pretty real because it was pretty real. Like that was
Sure.
really, really some of the best stuff out there. I thought those people,
Yeah.
not
Yeah, and I
not
love just kind of
necessarily
the
Busey's character,
festival
but
atmosphere.
definitely this
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
Busey's character at first didn't bug me because I was like, okay, sure, yeah, I could see somebody being like that. It's what they do with him that bothers
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to
I
that.
thought, but yeah, I thought this whole thing was good. I was because in Arrival they sort of hint at this because you can see there's people on the outside they're trying to keep out, which I think
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. You can go with that angle. It's just they never really show any of the people or how people are reacting. They just kind of tell you a little bit. This movie actually shows you a little bit of the atmosphere that is created by the public, and I was like, yeah, okay, I like all this stuff. It's taking an approach that I think is very interesting in that regard. I like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on too, just briefly. One of the reasons for me the Rob Lowe's character doesn't work is there wasn't a good conservative figure or contemporary that
Mhm.
it correlates to. You know, an older person. I mean, literally the conservative stereotype, the religious right stereotype, all of that wasn't. He was just not believable in that role, like
Not at
one
all.
iota, in my
Like, not
opinion.
and not
Yeah.
even and I don't wanna put all the blame on him, even though granted,
No.
I don't think it's a well acted part, but it's a very poorly written part too. I mean, like,
Hmm.
I I mean, him asking during that it's like, "We don't even know if these aliens believe in God." I just cringed. I was like, "That is not that's not something you're gonna say." That's not that's not the concern right now. If you're going through this scenario, I thought that was ridiculously cringe, that line. I was like, "Gosh, wow."
Makes no sense
Whoever wrote this, I was
whatsoever.
like, "You all don't
Yeah.
understand Christians or conservatives well, do you?"
No, not at all. Oh, thank you so much, brother. I will definitely connect with you, man. We gotta do a show together or something, man. We gotta figure it out, man. You've been with me for so long. So
I was a little
let me
like, I
see here.
was literally
Cannoli?
after that line, I was like, "Please tell me this guy's not gonna be in the movie much." And I don't dislike Rob Lowe. I think he's plenty good in other parts, but once that
No, I
line
think it's
came out of his
miscast.
mouth,
I'm
I
with
was
you.
like, "Please
Mhm.
tell me he's not in this movie all that much." Thankfully, that's I think the last like major uh part of the film he
There's 2
has.
or 3 moments he just pops up and then goes away.
Mhm.
But I couldn't agree with you more. And I also think I never think about this movie, but now I will. Of like, this is just Hollywood really doesn't understand religious people. this
At all.
movie, this movie, I think of a lot of movies that mishandle religious people, including movies that are technically under like the faith based label. Don't understand
Mhm.
religious people, but this one in particular, I feel like wow, it is way off base. So,
Yeah. I mean, like,
cannoli,
the only
cannoli.
the only Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say hey to Cannoli. He's listening while he's working,
What's
and
up,
SR
Cannoli?
is here. Steven Ransom, good to see you, brothers.
What's
Thank you
going
guys for
on?
watching, hanging out with us, my friend. So, go ahead,
Yeah.
brother.
But I was gonna say it's like the only like it's odd because I feel like the one character on the faith side of this movie's equation that they I guess do relatively well is McConaughey, and I think part of the reason I guess it sort of works is that they don't identify his religious beliefs really, other than him just saying that he believes in God. And at first I was kind of asking myself, is that bad? Should they have been more specific? And I think, if granted, if you understood religious people and you made it more specific, I think that would be better. But because they don't understand religious people well, I'm like, okay, I guess I'm kind of glad they kept it relatively ambiguous. Uh,
I'm
to
shocked they
touch on,
didn't go priest, right? Because the normal stereotype from Hollywood is they'll just go to what they kind of know. Many of them are just damaged Catholics. If you listen to these interviews, like
yeah,
they only know the Catholic Church basically exists. Everything else is just treated as something kind of fringy. They don't understand it at all. They don't know how to reflect it well on screen. And the fact that we end up with, this again, I think I'm with you. Like when he's just ranting and raving about it and all of that type of stuff, I'm fine. But when they try to turn him into basically, it's sort of like the abortion clinic bombing, right? It's supposed to be like that kind of person. It's like that's all they know. They don't know
and it's
anything else, and that's all they could go with, and it doesn't
and
make
the
any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, when he popped up and you see he looks like one of these like kooky, borderline cult like preachers, and obviously I recognize the actor and I'm like, "Oh,
Mhm,
okay, that's a little funny." I got a giggle out of that the first time. I was like, yeah, okay, that's even pretty good casting in that regard.
mhm,
I assumed that was all we were gonna see of him, and then he pops up later when Jodie Foster is going to some event, and I was like, okay, they brought him back. That's interesting. And
mhm.
then he pops up again for a relatively big part of the movie, which I have a lot of thoughts on that, like
Yeah,
literally that whole like 20-minute sequence.
yeah, we're gonna get to that for sure because that was just such a big
Ugh,
changer and everything. And it's like I don't like. Okay, anyway, all right. Hayden Rapollo, brother. Yes, man. Been thinking about you a lot, man. Let me
going
know if you
on.
need anything. Message me more. Keep me posted. The novel is way wackier, huh? All right. Not reading it. Um, yeah, interesting to know. So, well-known atheist. Indeed, he is probably one of the most prominent of that era as far as
Mhm.
that time, like sort of like very pre Richard Dawkins, very pre Christopher Hitchens, Carl Sagan. But Carl Sagan was not, as far as I know, and I was young, so and I was not a religious person during that, but I don't feel like he was an aggressive atheist the way the other two I mentioned were. So I could be wrong,
It's
but
probably why he has a more like, I don't even know many Christians who dislike him. They're like, well, he was an atheist and that's unfortunate, but there was nothing that I've ever heard that was particularly like antagonistic about him, like you would have like a Richard Dawkins.
Hmm. There was some talk about getting rid of him, not wanting him to be a part of anything that involved 2001. Yeah, 2001 would have really been messed up by this guy's science beliefs, because that was not at all what Kubrick pulled off. Kubrick really pulls off. We should do something on. We probably need to bring in a couple more people who really love 2001,
Hmm.
because it'd be fun to digest it and what people do really like it. So, good morning, Mephisto. No, it is the Gourd King's first time watching Contact, not mine.
Yeah, this
Last
is
week,
my first watch.
last time we were together, we did Arrival. That was my first time watching Arrival. So, but I have watched. We would definitely have a couple coming up that we'll talk about, because, yeah, our have never watched lists are full of movies that, if they're not great movies, there's a lot of really good movies or movies that people talk about that we haven't seen. So we're like, wow, this would be a great little thing to do regularly. So that's kind of how we ended up in this rabbit hole together. But thanks for watching, my friend. Retrospective on 2001. I have a book about. Oh, cool, very cool. Yeah, I watched it over the holidays, Gord, and I just didn't do a video, and I don't even know how to explain why I haven't done a video on 2001. But maybe I could just save that for Nerdporial, because he's going to become an expert if he's reading the whole
Hmm.
book on production. Yeah. Okay, so let's. I mean, I didn't change my slide because I was answering chat. Kind of what to go to next. Where we are in the story is the communications. She's interpreting, and then the stupidity of the politicians. And what is it? It could be a bomb. It could be whatever. I will say that I don't know. I didn't dislike any of this. What I dislike's coming after this. So let's get through this part first. So like the concept of all of this is fine, and the
Hmm.
puzzle elements of it are all fine.
Sure.
Um, I think it makes the movie feel small because we only focus on there's not like I'm trying to get my head around what the best way to say this. I think in Arrival it did it better, in that, because of that screen of TVs with all the world leaders or whatever, you feel like on a global scale everyone's trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
right? This
Like this
leap.
movie almost just kind of it mentions the fact that they've communicated with other people and that they're and they give a good reason for because they she initially gets into a little bit of hot water because she told scientists in other countries about this and they're like, why would you do that? That's a security breach. And she's like, well, because they explain how as the earth moves that they're not going to be able to hold on to that signal for very long and they need other scientists around the world to do it for them. I'm like, okay, that's a great explanation for that, but that's kind of the beginning and end of the worldwide connection beyond, I guess, like the sentiment you hear on the news. And there's a little bit later with some other countries, like Japan gets involved in this, but it's mostly very much America saves the day kind of thing. It's a little bit of that, which, granted,
Yep.
I mean, America has the best technology for this, so I don't mind obviously if they centralize this in America. It's just that's you don't get a whole lot of talk about like other how other people are you know contributing to this whole thing, which that
But
kind
again,
of
we go back to what we said earlier, right? It would have been better to have given her a unique skill set or some unique trait that she's followed that's made
exactly.
her really exceptional at this, and hence the
Hmm.
reason that she would be so much more key to this. And they really mess that up in here in a minute. So Stephen Ransom talks about the favorite thing about the film is the handling of time, memory, and faith. How all are locked behind a perception wall. The latter half of your comment is what makes that very interesting and worthy of a whole nother show, I think. I don't think the film does a whole lot with all of those things. I think it tries to. And the speech at the end almost feels rushed, but I get how you're feeling. I can't totally agree, but I definitely think we're fine. So yeah, what do you think, Gord?
I'll be honest, I would say of those three, it does Faith almost I would almost argue that it does Faith horribly.
Hmm.
Time, I think it has some really interesting
Yes.
ideas
Yeah.
on that one. Memory, yeah, sure. I mean, the way it incorporates memory, I'm more or less okay with that. I don't think this movie understands faith well at all.
Yeah, I think the end speech says it all. Like I'm like, wow, I don't think these things mean what you think they mean. So
I'm curious. Okay, since you've got him on screen, I'm
yes.
curious what you think of John Hurt's character. Because for one thing, I do think it's funny that he looks like Jeff Bezos. That cracked me up a little
Oh,
bit.
yes,
He
yes.
does
So
look
thank
like
you for
Jeff
that. So
Bezos.
on the rewatch, because I haven't watched this forever, I thought, holy crap, it's an amalgam
Yeah,
of
he.
Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos is like an
Mhm.
embodiment of John Hurt's character. I was
Right.
like,
And I
wow.
think I think Hurt does an excellent job acting the part, but he is basically a walking MacGuffin in this movie. He kind of is
Yeah,
always there to fix everything. So it's like it kind of saps a lot of the drama. Like he's like when she is needing funding right before they find the signal, he's the one who you find out later he's the one who gave her the funding. When what's the I'm trying to think of the second thing. So the third thing obviously is he puts her on the project. Like you find out they've got the whole second machine. He's like, you're gonna be the one. I'm like,
yeah, that's what
oh
this is
wow,
associated
that's
with, right.
oh right. He gives he is the one. So when they're getting for those of you who need your memories refreshed or haven't seen this, so when they're getting these messages, they're looking for what she calls a primer to kind of decode, like, because they're getting all this stuff and they're like, okay, how would you decode this? How long is it going to take? And they're like, it could take a really long time. You basically need a primer to start to decode this. He is literally the one who pops up. It's like, I've got the primer. Here you go. And it's like, wow, this guy just solves everything for them. And I'm
And
like,
there's
and
no
and you know, and I
mention,
don't really
like,
feel
of
like they
who
do a
he
good
tapped to
job.
do that. Like, they didn't tap a Japanese guy or something. Like, it would have been easy. It goes to Japan and everything, and it's like, well, wait, why did he not also fund them? And she's the expert over here on the listening and whatever. But this other problem solver puzzle guy, he's the expert on the primer. I just they just missed the opportunity to like make this make more sense. And
Hmm.
I was with you. I was like, huh, I remember
Yeah,
this
it's like
happening.
it's like,
I
why
know
does
where this
this
is
guy
going.
save? It's like, why does this guy always? Because like, okay, like him finding the
Mhm.
primer and having that for it's like, okay, I don't necessarily hate the idea behind that because it's a way to introduce him, but it's only that only really works because he kind of kept behind the scenes when she got her funding. Because you basically, if you don't remember the scene, she goes before a board, they're very reluctant, and then you see there's a camera watching her, and they get a phone call. It's like, oh, yep, you got your funding, and it turns out it's this guy. And one thing I don't think they do a good job at all of like kind of justifying why all these governments are so wary of him. I mean, the weird thing is that almost works better now because if you look at the sentiment around Elon Musk, it's like, okay, I guess I can sort of see it now. But I feel like if I had watched this then, I would have been like, why does everybody dislike him so much? I'm hearing words, but I'm not really seeing that justified. So it's a sentiment I guess I can understand because we have real world context to it now, but that doesn't necessarily
Right.
exist in the film.
Yeah, and I think the comments here help too, right? Because the comments say in the book he's more like a Disney guy with like theme parks and amusement park type things that would have, there's no context of he's just this mysterious guy, and it doesn't quite totally, which makes it feel more MacGuffin, 100%.
Yeah,
You know,
he
I live
really
in
it's like
this.
if this guy doesn't
Yeah,
exist and doesn't have all this money, they're screwed.
it doesn't make any sense. And then,
One
um,
thing, and this is
yeah,
going back a little bit. I when you find out that the message that got transmitted back was Hitler at the Olympics, I'm not gonna lie, I was laughing out loud at that because I was like, I think the movie handled it very maturely. That they were like, look, I know that there's a little bit of fear behind that, but I feel like today we would like people would freak out if that happened. But
yeah, I
I was
totally
just
agree.
sitting
That
there,
would be.
just
I was expecting more of a freak out, but it wasn't as in the 90s. It wouldn't have been as big of a freak out.
yeah.
It felt right for the time. That's been like it's created this hyperbolic insanity now, in
Hmm.
the last 10 years for sure. Um, yeah. So I love this too, Mephisto. The line about the government, see, we'll build to it twice the price. Like it really does embody so much of the government wasting money and whatever. So yeah. And then the fact that it's he cuts through red tape, or he's beyond red tape, I think is definitely the Elon Musk feel of the character for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, watching this now felt so strange with the current climate of tech bros and kind of what we're dealing with. So anyway, so that works. I couldn't agree more about sort of like the disconnected, the Japanese is sort of like mentioned. It was just very strange. Then we're immediately going to get into, though, this concept of what this thing is. They're going to build this machine. This is where the movie made a hard turn for me on my rewatch. That she considers herself, she's so narcissistic that she considers herself the best person to go. And throughout the movie, with Tom Skerritt's character as well, that these random people who are basically, they're experts in satellite signals and getting sounds from space would make them the best person to go on a transport ride to wherever they are, and not some buff Navy SEAL version of an astronaut. This was the hugest disconnect for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
makes no
like,
sense.
they would 100% send an astronaut. They're not gonna send her
100%.
boss. They're not gonna
Yeah.
send her.
No.
It's like,
Yeah.
they're going to send an astronaut on this mission 100%,
Yeah.
and that's not remotely her skill set. That's not remotely her boss's skill set. So I was like, okay. But here's the funny thing. So when it basically from the outset, when you realize they're building this machine that's going to send one person, it is her, or him, and they ultimately do choose him. And then there's the whole sabotage with the religious preacher, which I don't know if we can talk about that like now, like how ridiculous that sequence is, but all the drama of him getting picked and then this basically like ending with like dozens of people dying, I think adds nothing to the movie whatsoever.
Mhm.
And this is a 2.5 hour movie. It pads the running time probably by a good 20 minutes. And then boom, you find out Bezos Musk built a second machine and she gets to go on it. And I'm like, wow, that was a quick solve. What in the world did this actually add to the film? I just it
Yeah, I don't.
and I think and I also think it's poorly done because that guy is introduced and he looks and acts so kooky. I'm like, you're telling me you just let a guy step on with a bomb?
I
It's
know.
like the security is that bad
Yeah.
on this thing?
Ha Makes no sense.
And
I
and
would
the fact that they didn't show, like, how he got on, the fact that it's specifically this guy, which, by the way, her spotting him does nothing for the scene either. So it's like, if you wanted to do somebody breaks in, somebody blows stuff up, you could maybe be like an acolyte of his or just somebody with similar kooky sentiments or whatever, who's a little bit more smart. It's just it feels so out of place, like it's almost like a different movie. And like I said, this whole 20 minutes feels like just pure manufactured drama. It adds nothing to the movie. I really
I think they
dislike
would
this
have
part.
just been better served of having it be one of her employees that she just didn't get along with or something, that like just siding
Yeah,
with Tom Skerritt from, like, the Jungle days, right? So there's this other random character that's in those scenes, and then he just vanishes. He does not ever come up again. I'm like, "Why didn't you just make it that guy, but have sort of, like, conflict?"
you could even
Um,
make it to where, like, say somebody who is not even necessarily someone that she dislikes, just somebody who is on, kind of connected to them in the field, is upset about this or that and sabotages it in such a way to where nobody dies. It's just he gets hurt, and maybe there's a little bit of drama about, did she do this? Did she call this? It's like you could maybe do something with that, but ultimately, just this whole sequence from the time he gets chosen to this sabotage sequence, I'm like, you could cut this all out of the movie and nothing would be different.
there was a
You would
lot of
literally get
time
the
spent on
exact
it for sure.
same, yeah, you would literally get the same character development and largely the same story if you just cut it out. It's just you would move
Uh,
some things around for the most part, but that's it. That's it. This adds
yeah,
nothing
Bob
to the film.
Zemeckis. Yeah, Bob Zemeckis is the one working with those effects. He brought it to the table, very early CGI stuff for sure. We touched on it briefly because of the Forrest Gump element, bringing that skill set, for sure. It does. I will say it does give the audience, I think, and the normies a good chance to kind of understand the machine, how it's going to operate. They have all that conversation about all that to kind of get there. My big disconnect that I had in Arrival as well is, why is the linguist the girl that's the answer to everything, and why is this quantum physics guy, like, they're not astronauts? Like, why on earth are they? And this was so much worse than that. I was
Yeah.
That was if I had a big negative, that was probably one of my biggest negatives. So it's like, okay, and then they had to come up with a way. Their way of answering that was to have this astronaut who's a major, and they have a newscast shot that lasts like 2 seconds of, I just can't be away from my family. I just can't. It's too much of a risk. It's just too much of a risk. You're an astronaut,
And
dude. Like, what on earth are you talking about? Like,
I don't
okay,
know
I mean, I
who
get
wrote
it.
that part. I don't know who wrote that part, but
Oh,
it is horrible because it's like they're interviewing on the news, and then the kids make sure the kids might say, "Don't go, Daddy," and I'm like, "Stop! This is not how people behave. That's already they've already said. We don't need to see them say it. We know they said it. That's they've already implied they said that.
yeah.
You don't need it reiterated. It's so cheesy. It's like a Hallmark movie."
Mhm. Yeah, I agree, and Steven, you're absolutely right. The film is using, like, the lowest, basically, audience interpretation. It's like the lowest denominator using terrorism and righteousness. So, literally, it's Christian fundamentalists who attack an abortion clinic and, suicide bombers from the Middle East that we all hear about in the '90s, and then, of course, we fast forward to Arrival, and we have that, the different at least I think the attack on the machine in Arrival makes a lot more sense. I don't necessarily love it, but at least it those dots are easier to connect than they are in this movie,
Yeah. Like
100%
they
for
both
sure. And then
both of those scenes, like their sabotage scene, this sabotage scene, both have some similar problems. That one at the
yeah,
very least is a little bit more believable that it happened in the first place, because you do get a little bit of setup of a family member is very concerned about, like, what if you die, what if you get hurt, so there's a little bit more justification. This just kind of happens out of nowhere and is done in such a way where you're just like, yeah, right. He's just gonna be able to walk on there with a bomb strapped to him. This guy, come on! It was a major eye roller.
then we just kind of move, and again, Matthew McConaughey's character is put center stage because he matters, because he's on the quote selection committee of who to pick to send. She feels like she should be the one, and again, I'm still at this point where it's almost like the courtesy pick to put her on, that she would remotely even be viable, was where my brain was. I've seen the movie. I know where it's going, but that was by far the worst thing for me. And there's all these all these other countries that are just dismissed along the way. And then even with what you said earlier is 100% right. When the second machine is in Japan or whatever, why on earth is James Woods' character in the room? Why is it that the Americans are running the freaking show? Like, it made no sense to me at all that they're in Japan, a facility that's funded by this guy. John
Yeah, I
Hurst's
mean, for
character
one thing,
had
you would think the setting would be something like the UN. Uh, that would be
I
what
was
you would
going more like
think.
Godzilla, like it was just the equivalent of like their version of stuff. Like I don't it was like, well, we can't lack well, those people don't really have the technology. How I feel like the filmmakers were. I'm like, wait, I'm confused. Why did it at the time I didn't pick any of that up. At the time I don't remember ever coming away kind of off put by all of that. But
Mhm.
the fact that it's
And you're muted.
still involved like the US military officials, and it's still make I don't know. I maybe I'm overreading all of that, but that's how I felt.
Yeah.
Let's see. Um, so yeah, that kind of puts us into the seat where she, after the death of Tom Skerritt's character, they have the second machine. She's clearly the person that's going to go now. They're going to go through this whole process to put her out there, and she's going to go on this trip. And then,
Well, really, after he dies, that's when Musk Bezos guy really just kind of pops up and says, "Oh, I built a second one. You
hmm
want it?" It's
yeah,
very straightforward. Like, okay, you're going, because all the process of the choosing thing comes before that, and that's
right.
where Tom Skerritt's character gets picked. Which, by the way, his character, the way they ultimately kind of handle him, I thought felt incomplete because on the one hand, like you hear a little bit about how he's kind of constantly undermining her, and then it feels like at first, like when they realize, oh, this is real, it starts to feel like at first he's on her side, and then you realize, oh, okay, he seems like he's on her side because he realized, okay, this is real, so I'm going to use this to my advantage, and I was like, okay, all that's actually really good. It's more that she seems fine with it right before he dies. Like she's still quite nice to him. I'm like, why would you be? He's a slime
hmm
ball, basically. I mean, he's a very crafty one. And I'm like, it's weird because I do really like the way his character's done. I think he's probably the best fully realized character. It's just the way she reacts to him right before she dies, where she seems more like kind of congratulatory to him. I'm like, why would you be? Why would you be? He's been working against you this entire time. Uh, he's the reason why you're not going, and it's you're by the movie's internal logic, it is unfair that he gets the position and not you. I would think you would hold a much bigger grudge against him, and it would be perfectly justified. But yeah, it felt a little
Mm.
bit odd that that was their final interaction. That it seemed rather friendly, and I was like, why would this be friendly? It almost felt like tonally they didn't quite know exactly what they wanted to do with their relationship because there's Fitcher's character says he says you're really brilliant, but you're also a pain in the butt. So you almost get the sense like maybe he cares about her, but at the same time, uh, he thinks that she's wasting her time. So you almost think maybe there's a decent like mentor relationship where they butt heads, but they respect each other. That seems to be the setup. But then you realize, oh, okay, he just works against her a lot, so he's actually kind of a slime ball. It's a little weird how it ultimately fleshes out. But again, once they choose him, from the time they choose him to the moment he dies, I think all of that is done horribly. It's probably the worst part of the
Yeah.
movie as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it just gets too tedious for me. James Wood needs a little mustache to twirl. That's kind of funny. Yes, for sure. Angela
Like
Bassett's
I feel like
character, I
James
think he's
Wood, like
fine. So
he plays the part really well. It's just he's very one note. They make him a very one note character. He's always just
yeah.
there to be an obstacle. That's the point. He's there to be an
Hmm.
obstacle no matter what, but never too big a one.
All right, let's get to the. We have to kind of jump ahead because of time, just to kind of get through. Um, I don't know. This is early in their photo stack, I guess, but we'll just use that one. Obviously, and I want to be clear for those critics that are coming my way. Look, I get all the imagery. I get all the metaphors. She's
Mhm.
walking the plank. She's taking a leap of faith. She's got to go through like kind of like a rebirth metaphor, if you will, with all these images and deal with like there's a shot of the chair where obviously it looks like she's going to like an electric chair, like the death kind of thing, so she can be rebirthed at the end of this. I mean, I get all the imagery.
The
I just
one I would say the
feel
one bit of writing that was nicely subtle on that front, because I feel like too much of the imagery and the metaphors are a little too on the nose. The one bit that I thought, wow, they actually wrote that part really well, was when they're all trying to add stuff to the thing she's bringing along, and she's like, "Well, the instructions say nothing about bringing this," and almost like we should try. Like it's almost like taking it as almost like word of God. We should not add anything to what these instructions are. We should do exactly what it says. And I was like, that's interesting. That's an interesting way of looking at that. It's just they don't really follow through with it after the fact. And honestly, it turns out that her reasoning was kind of wrong because her bringing along a recorder actually turns out to be kind of the one thing that gives her experience some credibility at the end. So I was like, oh,
but she
well,
doesn't know that,
she
right?
didn't
Because
know
the
it.
argument
Yeah,
that she would make, if you watch the movie, she comes away. If you are, she would make the argument to them that if I stayed in the chair, I would have died because of the way the
sure.
chair responds. So it's funny that you say that because the normie wouldn't necessarily even get that. I don't think. It's
Hmm.
interesting. So the journey's fine. I feel like it was 2001 kind of wannabe stuff. Like it wasn't terrible. I love the concept of the wormholes, how it all moves and it starts and stops a couple times. She thinks that she's being heard. She's at least going to continue recording. I do like the fact that she's talking to herself, like keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. I love it. That was
I
fun.
like when she's I like part of it. It's the
Hmm.
opening part where she keeps on having to say, I'm good to go, I'm good to go." I think the acting in that part is really bad. It's very weird and corny. She just keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. I'm like, can she just pass out or something? Because now when she wakes up and she's going through the wormhole, she's talking to herself. I'm like, okay, that's mostly fine. Some of the parts are a little corny, like when she sees like the I think she says she's at some kind of cosmic event and that they should have sent a poet, and I'm just like, okay, that's a little cheesy, but whatever. But for the
Mhm.
most part, I think the sequence is acted well enough. Her performance to
Yeah,
me overall is it's very up and down. There are parts of her performance I really like, and then there's other parts of it I don't like so much. Like this is very up and down for her.
I really agree, and actually, I was quite disappointed. I came away feeling this felt a lot more of a vanity type project than I would have said before the rewatch. If you just asked me general stuff, I would have just had pretty general positive things to say about her performance, but I feel like there were some things where she was just not called to the carpet on. Like this shot they captured in this still, I think is just this was there's some moments where you're like, oh, ooh, ooh,
Mhm.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it wasn't horrible, just wasn't horrible. Um,
just a
Stephen
little dated, a
likes
little dated.
Stephen likes the poet line, I guess.
Well, I
Um,
think he's just quoting it, but yeah, I feel like her when she's doing like the technical aspect of her job, I think her acting's really good. It's more when
mhm,
she's doing kind of the relational interactions that I think she comes off real like a lot of her interactions with like William Fichtner. I'm like, wow, this is bad. A lot of these like acting
mhm.
choices are weird. It's like she's almost like adding quirks that weren't there before sometimes, and I'm like, are you going for that she's socially awkward or something? Because that's not really established, and you don't necessarily get that sense when she meets Matthew McConaughey. So it's just it feels inconsistent at times. You know, it's why I'm kind of like I feel like this movie, if it had stuck with a lot of the technical side of this equation, sort of the way Arrival did, and kind of kept more to that tone, I feel like this movie would have worked way better than it did. But and I think that's especially true on the performance front.
All right, let's get to this. Um, on my rewatch, I will just say this: I didn't know it had, I guess, read her mind to know like the nickname he had for her and stuff. Like I felt like that was where the overreach was for me. This, let me be this human form because that's more digestible and easy for you, petty beings. But it was just very, I don't know how to explain this. This didn't
I'm gonna
age well for me.
yeah,
Did not age.
I thought everything from on her journey part was really interesting. It was really cool. This sequence did nothing for me. I
Yeah.
thought this is where I thought Robert Zemeckis is not the right person for this movie because
Mm,
this feels wildly sentimental. I mean, to the point where I was just like, "Can this scene be over already?"
mhm.
I'm like, I sort of get what you're going for here, but I don't think this resonates at all because it's coming off. It's like the way it's coming off. Dialogue wise, is this is very much you're encountering the aliens and stuff, and I'm like, okay, but this doesn't remotely feel like an alien encounter. This feels almost more like a spiritual encounter, uh,
Right.
and it's like, okay, you can do something with that idea, because it almost feels like they're trying to go for like almost in her mind she's almost having like an experience like she's gone to heaven and she's seeing a lost loved one, but dialogue wise it's very clearly she's meeting whoever this alien species are, which by the way it cracks me up that even though it's not pronounced this way the spelling would be that they're called vegans. But
Oh, right. No, it's 100%. And
I
let
thought
me
that
add to this too, because I've always thought that a good concept conversation starting kind of film would be you create like a Matrix or something like this, an alien type film that basically is, well, yeah, we are the god. What are you talking about? Like we're the ones that created everything. Like we got it. You're in the simulation. You're in what we created. They're the beings beyond that. Like, whether they want to be the creators of Roman mythology and Greek, you know, and it felt like
it felt
in
very
the rewatch
non-committal to its own
yeah,
idea in a way.
they didn't wanna do that, though. They felt like they were going to go to that realm too. Like, I don't know, it just this fell very flat for me to
Yeah,
know they didn't know what to do. I feel like they're not going science and they're not going religion. They just went into nothing because they went sentimental dad. And I think if they had just been another human like, Morgan Freeman. It's like this is the perfect moment for this just ambiguous dude dressed in black, and it's like he's just gonna talk to you about stuff. And I don't
the
know. It was
the
mm,
problem with trying to like I almost think because okay, if you go by what happens after this when she's have at the hearing and she's basically saying she can't fully describe what happened to her and I'm like, then don't show what she went through because
right.
once we see it, we know it can be described. Um,
Yep.
and I'm like, this really isn't even all that complex. It's
Mm-mm.
really cheesy, but I was like, if you really wanted to commit to this idea, because I think the idea of like it literally like okay, so time wise that thing passes through that those rotating thingies, and then when she hits like to the people on Earth, it took a couple of seconds, but she in her own time has been away for like 18 hours. And I'm like, that's fascinating. I actually think that's really, really cool. I'm fine with that idea. But her experience, if she's not going to be able to describe it, then I'm like, you're either better off being very, very vague about what you show, or get to a certain point in that journey and then don't show what happened. Just show her react like, oh my gosh, like she just had this incredible experience. Make her act it out. Like, but don't
Hmm.
fully
Okay.
show it. And you could maybe do something with that. Because what
I
we
think that
saw,
they
I was
were.
just like, ugh, I'm just like, this is I don't want to see this. This is goofy. This is
Yeah,
really
but see,
goofy.
that's
This doesn't feel like
them.
an alien experience.
When you get to this part, this is when the film makes a drastic turn, because what they're doing is they're saying, you, the scientist, now experienced an alien who tapped your memory and gave you the what religious people see as their godlike experience. And if you start explaining this to everybody, they're just going to think that you're crazy and delusional, exactly what you've thought the entire time. Hence her speech, where she gives almost a religious speech, trying to have a very I believe what I believe because I believe it. And like I said, it doesn't age well. It just felt like an ending that is gobbledygook, and they didn't want to offend Christians, and they wanted to be very pro science and very not necessarily atheist, but they definitely wanted to be radically pro science and has everything filled out, even to the point where we could create a conundrum for the scientists. The problem is okay. Let me just take this down so we can have this head into our closing remarks. Is it me? Or does the alien seem really dumb now to send their Voyager back with no proof, no evidence, no nothing? They got nothing to go
Yeah.
on. Like this is they've done this allegedly millions of times or whatever. This is really kind of a dumb way to treat a planet of beings. Like you just have this one random person, or I mean, I guess in theory they could just keep sending people because the machine wouldn't have died. You know what I mean? They could just keep sending people, but there's no like, what's the point? Like I don't understand what is this person supposed to do? Let's say they send an astronaut, and now it's just Major Jim, and he comes back and he's like, "Well, I saw my mom when she died, and I was on this place in Cleveland, and this is my memory when I was a kid." Or whatever. Well, you're just crazy. Okay, there's no impact on humanity. Doesn't move them any forward toward these aliens. It's so odd with this kind of ending, with there just being this gray area where they could not figure things out. I don't know. I
And
want to
this
hear your
well,
thoughts on
and
kind of like this kind of
well,
stuff.
this to me is at the crux of the problem. Is this is why I think if you're wanting this movie, because at the end, look, if you listen to the dialogue at the hearing, it is very on the nose, making a comparison between things she has said to Matthew McConaughey about faith versus science. It's flipping that very obviously on her, and I'm like, then you shouldn't have shown what she saw, because if you're not wanting to be, uber atheist, and you're wanting to kind of toe that line, you can't show what she saw. It's like she can still believe it to be more scientific, but if you want to leave a little bit of uncertainty, don't show what she saw. Make her just react to it and try to describe it, but only to a certain point. That would work so much better if you're trying to go for that kind of sentiment. But since you did show it, it's like, well, then it's like, look, if you're wanting to lean into a more, you know, atheistic, you know, if more of an atheistic explanation of what this is, just lean into it. Just go for it. Look, it's a movie. I'm not going to be offended by that. It's a movie. It's not real.
But they're going with the conspiracy theory thing, right? Because there is proof. She has proof of 18 hours of static that was recorded that the government covers up. So it
Yeah,
leans
we find
into
that out
we
later,
have
which I feel like very
right.
much
It's like a
undermines things.
footnote, and that the James Wood and the Angela Bassett character are discussing it, which again lends myself to, why on earth were they ever in the room? Why would they have the only footage? Why was she never allowed to watch the footage? Like, okay, let's say this was you or me, bro, and obviously, what do you mean there's no footage? I was gone forever. Let's watch it. And
Mhm.
once it goes past what 4 or 5 seconds or however long they claim, you'd be like, well, obviously there's more footage here. Keep watching. How long is there? 18 hours? Huh. it's just
It's
such a
very interesting.
dumb, convenient element that they kind of try to shoehorn in for alien people to just believe alien people. In other words, it feels like
Yeah,
the
it's
government
very
knows
much
stuff, but they're
this.
covering it up.
Yeah, it feels like they are working really hard to make sure they don't commit to their own ideas, and they're
Hmm.
and look, being an actual Christian, I'm just like, look, you're not fooling me or anything with what you all think on the matter, so just go with it. Just it's like I don't try to pander to me like, oh, we got to make sure we don't offend the Christian. I'm like, your own movie gives your position away. Don't act like you're trying to be pro faith and pro faithless science in there. It's like just lean into what you're trying to do. Uh, but if you're wanting to toe that line, I think it's essential. Don't show what she saw at all, because just the mere fact that you showed it, you showed that conversation between her and the David Morse looking alien. I'm like, okay, this is clearly an atheistic explanation. These are aliens. It's like they've been around billions of years. It's like, okay, that's fine. You can lean into it. It's a movie. Not going to be offended by that. You have your own internal logic. You have your own story. Just do it.
I would have thought they
Otherwise,
would have saved
just
it if they had. Okay, so listen, and it sounds crazy to go back to Haddon, but if we're going to make such a key element with this McGuffin nonsense, then in those final moments when they think they've got it all figured out, I think they should have gone to static and then
mm,
shown up the TVs and then adding them all one by one. That there's this new weird link, or there's new weird leak the government wasn't able to keep under wraps because Hayden leaked it post death. Like he somehow knew how to hack the system and he had a copy of the 18 hours, and that there's proof. And the movie ends with the fact that the proof is going to be out there, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? I think that
mhm.
would have been a way. It doesn't save it for me. I'm not going to lie, but at least it feels better than the government conspiracy and nobody knows. And it was just dumb. I
Yeah,
just,
it
yeah.
feels like they're very much like the ending feels like they are trying to land the theme rather than
Hmm. Yeah.
committing to what's actually happened.
Right.
And that always annoys me with movies. It's like, look, I understand what your themes are. That's fine, but you need to make sure you write the events of your movie to actually fit, because they don't here. They
Yeah.
really
The
don't.
agenda or what you're trying to accomplish is mattering more than what's actually happening in the story. And then once you evaluate the story for what it actually is, you have all of these major contradictions, and we don't get to the theme. We don't get to your message at all. We create all sorts of other problems in our head. So,
Yeah, because here's
yeah.
the thing: is like you could even with showing the aliens, you could still say, I mean, if you're going to show that and you're wanting to even make sure that there's an element of uncertainty of whether it's just pure science or there is a god out there, you can have part of their conversation be to where she asks, "Did you create everything, or is there something more?" And
Hmm.
he maybe even could be something as simple as he gives her kind of a knowing look, like, "We know as much as you do on that matter. Like, we're not
Yeah,
sure."
he even alludes to it because he's talking about how they were gone long before us. Like we didn't make this machine. You know what I mean? He's not admitting that he's the engineer. He's admitting that there's something way beyond him. So anyway,
Yeah,
um, we have to wrap because of time because we could keep going for hours upon hours with these kinds of things. So,
definitely.
you've only watched it the one time, correct?
Yeah,
So we have an initial review or initial reaction type score. Where are you
sure.
at on this, Gord? Gord, for those of you at home who don't know, Gord, he grades even harder than I do. Gord's scale is radically harder than me. So go ahead.
So, there's a lot about this movie I do like. I obviously do have some very heavy criticisms about it. I think the technical side, like I've said before, was done really, really well. I would have loved it if the movie committed to quite a bit more of that. I think that this movie had no business being 2.5 hours long unless you wanted to take that 20 or so extra minutes that they waste on uh, her boss's story after he gets picked. If you want to take that to add a little bit more to her character, add a little bit more technical stuff, that would have been very welcome. But I feel like for this movie does probably, I would say, a little bit more right than it does wrong. So I'm mostly down the middle with this one, with slightly
Okay.
tilting in favor of this being decent. So I would give this like about a 5.25 out of 10. I think it's
Okay, we can't add quarter points, so
okay.
we're
Well,
gonna let
well,
yeah.
I would then just, I would just say 5 out of
Say 5.
10,
Okay.
more or
We're
less
we're
down
we're
the
actually
middle.
gonna be pretty close. I'm gonna go 3 out of 5 for me. This is a 3. It's a Midland movie that was basically a good movie score back in the day. Most movies were like that 2.5 to 3. 3 was like, you can kind of go, if this is kind of your thing, you should go see it. Like that was kind of the general gist of things, and things that were like really good, like even more people should go, was when things would go 3.5 and beyond. It If you had asked me cold, I probably would have leaned a little higher than that. Not necessarily a 4, but I probably would have said, yeah, it's like a 6.5. You know what I mean? Out of 10. Like it's a kind of like that. Now I'm like, oh, I am really stretching at a 6. I'm with you on the 5.5 to a 6. Like I'm leaning down, not up. Like there's the holes were a lot more glaring and issues with it than I remembered it to be. And I will go full circle.
I would say there's a great movie in this movie. It's just
100%.
it is weighed down by a lot of other stuff.
There's just a couple pieces that need to be buttoned up, and we even can keep Tom Skerritt. I just my theory on that could be just that they're both going to build both machines. Like she doesn't get picked, they're going to go on. Their machine's not going to work. She's watching it remotely, not necessarily kill him off, but humiliate him. We eliminate all the terrorist nonsense, and then they just Haddon's got another machine, and it's like but yeah. And I want to go full circle back to what you said in the beginning. Yeah, if I never watch it again, no big deal. Like it's just like, oh, okay, I did it. So yeah.
To answer Stephen Ransom's question, yes, I think Jenna Malone.
Yes, Gina Malone was really. Is it Jenna or Gina? I don't know. Anyway,
I always have called her Jenna Malone, but I've never actually heard that pronounced by anyone. So I could be wrong on that. But I'll say this: I almost wish that we could have the older one play that character now, because I think she would probably be a better choice. Jenna Malone's a good actress. She's actually a really good actress.
Yeah, that was all really. I got to be honest. I don't really. Let's see. The bad acting is tricky, because like I don't really blame Tom Skerritt. I don't blame James Woods.
I think his acting is mostly.
And I can't think of anyone's acting that was bad. Jodie Foster got out over her skis a few times, or wasn't wrangled in properly by Zemeckis. But I don't.
Like Rob Lowe's a very small part. It's bad, definitely, and yes, I think his acting is bad. But it's the writing's terrible.
The caricature was really bad. So it's hard to even be totally like a bash on Rob Lowe. Like he just didn't bring it or phoned it in. Whatever. Like I don't know. That character is so badly done. So
he's very much playing a brief caricature, and it's like ugh.
Canola's with us. We're in good company. He says my problem is a lot with Zemeckis movies is that they could be great, but they end up just being average. Yeah, and it's like. It's a rewatchable average most of the time. Like most of his movies are like in that again, but that's the old school score. The old school score used to just be 2.5, 3. Most things land there. Then you would add rewatchability as a factor. How rewatchable is it? This is not a miserable rewatch, other than
not at all. No,
I could not
rewatch this movie. Yeah.
When I pulled it up and I saw how long it was, I was actually shocked. I did not remember it being that long. That is a huge negative for me. I don't want to sit through almost 3 hours of my life. There's no way. That's 2.5 hours is a lot for this movie. But yeah, well, Gourd, we did another one, man. That's good.
We did.
Good times. Folks, you are in for a treat next time. I don't know where you're at on your things, but if you want to see something crazy or hear something crazy, we're going to do Master and Commander. Now, this movie is considered a great movie, a fantastic movie by some. I have never watched this movie. It's embarrassing. It has been on the to watch list. I mean, for at least 2 years. And it's just, I didn't even know it was still on the list until I was going through some stuff with Gourd. I was like, wait, how about this one too? And I was like, yeah, we got to put that one. So I did a poll today, was talking about some stuff that I hadn't watched. And yeah, that kind of moved it right up to the list. So we'll do that. But a little tight on time to squeeze these in. But yeah, we just kind of run through it. Hopefully we can scratch at your itch to either watch this again or see it for the first time like I did, those kinds of things. But
Canoli hasn't seen it either. Okay, I'm gonna have to make an MMM note. Master and Commander, dude.
Dude, I wish we could figure out how to get you in. I know you're working. That time zone thing is tricky. We'd love to get your first time watch experience. Maybe you can get it in before then and kind of hang out and chat, if nothing else.
Put it this way, Canoli, he brought up, you all both know how strict I am on movies. Master Commander might be a 10 out of 10 for me.
I know, it's crazy. He talked it up way too high. I don't even want to take that into consideration because it's just fun. But folks, thank you so much. Gourd, my brother, thank you for doing this, man. This was great. Oh, Asaj Melody made a comment. This is a favorite movie ever. Okay, cool.
Contact or Master and Commander?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure which one, but it's all right. But got to head out the door, folks. You guys take care. Be blessed. Till next time, I am Pops.